Hi, everyone. This is Shuo here. I'm a general partner at IOVC, where I focus on investing in seed stage B2B startups powering the future of work. And I'm also on the faculty at UC Berkeley, where I've been teaching entrepreneurship. Really excited to be here, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more about the future of work, particularly as enabled by blockchain. So, to start, I want to start with the idea that technology enables a positive feedback loop, where new technology triggers innovation that then enables more diversity, which in turn fuels further innovation. For example, internet and social media has made it significantly easier for more people, and therefore a more diverse set of voices, to spread their ideas and become influencers. Similarly, blockchain as a technological innovation has done the same, where it has enabled more diversity in terms of stakeholders, more diverse stakeholders that are represented in ecosystems. So, in traditional ecosystems, of course, we had institutions, including our governments, banks, our companies, that would really sit in the middle and be centralized ecosystems. However, in blockchain, it has really changed the way that these incentives are aligned for our next generation. In fact, blockchain's most distinguishing characteristic is that it's distributed and it enables a more distributed ecosystem. So, in a traditional ecosystem, whereas one on the left hand side, in a traditional ecosystem, you would have the government, the bank, or the company that sits in the middle that facilitates all transactions. In a distributed system, every single participant in the ecosystem would have in real time a copy of all of those transactions that are taking place, and therefore become very much a stake, not just a stakeholder, but immediately also have ownership in powering this ecosystem. And as a result, blockchain has enabled our next generation to influence the future of work fundamentally in terms of how the incentive structure is aligned. So, to start with the first example, traditionally, whereas we would have had the government sitting in the middle, in a blockchain enabled ecosystem, instead of having the government back our central fiat currency, Bitcoin has actually been the first time where blockchain has enabled a distributed currency that's not backed by any centralized third party. Of course, there's a hybrid in between called stablecoins, which is a digital currency pegged to a fiat, but it fundamentally changes the future of work, particularly in terms of how we're incentivized and how we're compensated for our work. In fact, we have more and more people from the next generation demanding to be paid in Bitcoin, not just athletes, but also celebrities and people in other professions. This also significantly changes how we think about even things like where we do work. Because in the past, if we were compensated in one specific currency, we were likely tied down to that particular geographic location. Whereas now, of course, with cryptocurrencies, they're truly global in nature and enabled by all the participants in that particular ecosystem and not attached to any particular government. And of course, the second example is that in the past, we would have had the bank sitting in the middle. But now, in a distributed ecosystem, we have had blockchain enable platforms like Ethereum to exist that actually power all types of transactions. So, the smartest that our banks have been in the past is enabling if and then statements like, if I receive a utility bill, then compensate for that out of my checkings account. But Ethereum actually enables much smarter transactions where you can fill the if and then statement with much more creative things like, if I receive a database and I can verify for that digitally, then compensate for that with this particular digital wallet, or compensate for that with another database. So, what these if and then statements are really called are smart contracts. So, smart contracts are just ways to automate smarter transactions with more creative if and then statements. And of course, what smart contracts has enabled is for our next generation to really change the way that banks work by enabling decentralized finance. And as a quick example of how that's changed what we do for work, is that not only have we changed the way banks work, that actually fundamentally changed what we do when we spend time at work. In fact, Veeam is the first blockchain startup that was backed by Google. In the past, if we were using the traditional banking system, we would typically spend at least single digits in terms of transaction fees percentage wise, and we would spend about 5 to 7 business days waiting for that particular account to settle. Most of the process in that particular experience is not necessarily automated. So, for people who work in the banking system, they actually need to do all the steps in order to verify that particular transaction to help it settle. However, with a blockchain enabled system, because all the participants are stakeholders and directly nodes in that ecosystem themselves, it actually enables for much faster settlement. So Veeam can actually allow B2B payment globally to be made that settles on the same business day and at no transaction fees. And so, with this particular ecosystem, it enables us to automate the things that are more mundane and allow us to focus on parts of our job that are more meaningful. So, it certainly enables our next generation to focus on more things that we as humans are uniquely good at, things like developing relationships and building community. In fact, blockchain has certainly enabled our next generation to particularly focus on this community building piece, given this distributed ecosystem and the fact that every single participant is a node. So, the third example, the last example I'll share is that, of course, in the traditional ecosystem, we have companies sitting in the middle, and a blockchain enabled ecosystem has completely changed the way that companies do work as well by enabling all these decentralized applications. So, imagine a company such as Uber previously having to sit in the middle, but now having a decentralized application that can essentially replace the existence of a centralized company and allow all the participants, like riders and drivers, to directly transact with one another. Of course, the fact that decentralized applications exist has enabled for things like decentralized autonomous organizations to emerge, where there's no longer need for a centralized company, but everything is decentralized and automated. And of course, that has also then enabled initial coin offerings, or ICOs, to emerge with more creative compensation schemes, where it's not just equity, but can also be ownership, loyalty points, etc., that's attached to tokens. And a quick extension of that is, of course, NFTs, which have been super popular. NFT stands for non fungible tokens, which allow us to tokenize unique digital items and attach value to that. So, those, of course, then enable our metaverse, which means a completely digital universe where items of value can exist. You can tokenize a particular icon and have that be your unique digital possession. Of course, you can digitize a piece of digital real estate as well. So, a really interesting example of that is how we here at Berkeley have leveraged blockchain to enable our first ever auction of NFT. In fact, we actually digitized this NFT based on Nobel Prize winning research. And after we auctioned this off, it actually netted UC Berkeley $50,000 more to power and fund further research. So, as we've seen so far, of course, blockchain has enabled huge changes to take place in terms of companies, not just companies, but also banks as well as governments. In fact, Gartner predicts that 10% of the global GDP will be recorded on the blockchain in the next 5 years. And as a result of that, the way that our governments, banks, and companies do work have been completely revolutionized by blockchain technology, which has, as a technological innovation, triggered and enabled a more diverse set of stakeholders to join the ecosystem and influence the way that it's shaped. And as a result of these changes in our institutions, it has then enabled our next generation to influence the future of work by completely changing what we do for work, how we own our work, and how we're compensated. So, of course, with all of this, what's particularly important to end this particular conversation is thinking about not just blockchain in a vacuum. So, of course, it's fascinating to think about the impact of blockchain as a technology on our future of work. But it's even more fascinating when we think about the intersection of all of these exponential technologies, when blockchain can interact with AI and cloud and quantum and all of these other technologies to enable more interesting things that we do. In fact, I'm confident that all of these technologies together will trigger additional innovation that will then enable even more diverse set of voices to participate that then fuels even more innovation. And so, of course, all of this will enable our next generation to change the future of work in much more creative and sometimes unexpected ways. So, you've already started in the perfect place. the Economist's Innovation at Work conference is the best place to start to learn about the intersection of these exponential technologies and their impact on the future of work. And of course, if you want to follow further conversations in addition to what you're already learning at this conference, I definitely want to end with a specific action step of how you can potentially stay in the loop on what's happening out of Silicon Valley. So, a nonprofit that I've been serving on the board for a number of years now is called Decode. Decode has since become the largest technology and innovation community that's co-hosted with Berkeley and Stanford. In fact, post the pandemic, it has expanded significantly beyond the two schools to expand to other schools on the East Coast and Midwest, etc. So, Decode as a nonprofit has hosted a ton of fascinating conversations. I serve as one of the board members alongside other board members, including the CTO of Microsoft US, as well as Chief Privacy Officer at Google, and other executives who have brought technology companies public on the NASDAQ. And so these conversations are particularly fascinating and informative in terms of helping us to better understand the future of work because it's coming from practitioners who are very much at the forefront of the industry. The most important part of all of this is, of course, that future of work is evolving at light speed. And so it's particularly important to understand not just from first principles perspective what should happen, but also what is currently happening. What are some of the leading companies working on? What are some of the most fascinating startups working on? And how can there be fascinating partnerships between corporates and startups to enable more innovation and more change? So, one specific conversation that you may be interested in that certainly has talked about how blockchain can enable our next generation to influence the future of work is this conversation I just personally hosted with the VP of data at Coinbase. He used to head data science at LinkedIn. And he very much talked about this intersection of blockchain and AI and its potential impact on the future of work. So, with all of this, I want to make sure that we've talked through all of the ways in which blockchain has enabled our next generation to change the way that all of our institutions, including our government, our bank, as well as our companies, are structured and incentivized by enabling more diverse set of voices to become stakeholders and part of the community in terms of how these ecosystems work. And of course, that's in turn changed the way that we do work in all ways in terms of future of work, in terms of all of these aspects. And so, with that, hopefully, I've left you with some specific ideas that you could take back and implement in your respective organizations, not just as executives, but also as individuals. So, with that, thank you all so much. And of course, I welcome any of you to reach out on LinkedIn or my email. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and to exploring the future of work together with all of you. Thank you.